Well, good morning. Let me first see whether I can get the technology to work. Maybe somebody can help me to start my presentation. That looks good. Thank you. Aim this at.
I can help you.
Moment. It wasn't. It wasn't switched on. Okay. Okay. So actually, some people think that. Sorry. Ask for this glass, and it seems to be a good idea. That in the age where we live, where everybody talks about ICT, that information and communication is the same everywhere. But of course, people in this room need not have explanation that is not true. That's just the hardware. And we are going to talk about the software. The software is different everywhere. And if you look at the program of this conference, then you can see how very broad this software is. Now, the interesting thing from a cultural point of view is that you can say, okay, the software depends on our culture, but it's also language and communication is the way we transfer our culture. So it's both at the beginning and at the end of it. And human cultures differ for many reasons, but today I will speak mainly about the influence of nation, and that means, in this case, the country where we were born and raised. So, first of all, the word culture, because there is also regularly, especially in the public media, there is an enormous amount of confusion, even with the first one, although you can say, okay, we all know that the culture of potatoes is something else than the culture of people, but some newspaper journalists don't seem to know that. Then the normal, usual use of the word until maybe 20 years ago was civilization, and you have still many countries have a ministry of culture. And I think what we're going to do tonight, Professor Krośnie, that is typical, that type of culture number 2. But now we use it a lot in the third term, and the term comes from cultural anthropology, and this is my definition of it. And I've split it in 3 parts. It is, first of all, something collective. It is always something for which you need at least 2 people. One single person has no culture. It may have a personality or whatever, but for a culture you need at least 2 people, and usually many more. It's programming of the mind. That is, of course, a metaphor. But because we are all wrestling with programs these days, we know what a program is, we also know what can go wrong with the program. And then it is the kind of program that we don't all share, but that distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from another. And then today I will talk mainly about the effect of societies, but you can also talk about the influence of religion, of your occupation, whether you are a doctor or a lawyer or a carpenter, the organization you work for, even the department of the university you work for, and also gender, women versus men. Sometimes very useful if you have a difference of opinion with your preferred partner of the opposite sex, that if you can agree that this is a cultural problem, because then the sting is out of it. So this is the onion. This is a diagram I like to use, which shows that our mental programming comes in different levels, and some are easier to reach than others. Actually, if you're in the area of language, you operate on the level of symbols, which is relatively easy to affect. Heroes are people we respect, we talk about. Rituals are activities we engage in for their own sake, but those are the visible parts, but in the middle of it is the values, and the values are invisible. Actually, the values tends to be more here than here. And values are emotional, and they always have a minus and a plus, so I give a number of of examples here. You had politicians who would talk about the evil empire, and that of course was a matter of expressing their values. Well, immoral, moral. And the last one is my favorite because I have for a number of years worked at the Department of Economics, and I was dealing with colleagues who were handling rational choice models, and then this social scientist comes in, or they also think they are social scientists, but I doubt that. And I say, well, whose rationality do you mean? Do you mean Dutch rationality, or do you mean American rationality, or do you mean Japanese rationality? Economists don't like those questions, by the way. Now, how do we obtain our values? Well, we obtain them mostly early in our childhood, because when we are born, because we are not completely programmed. I have once had the privilege to see the birth of a horse, and I was very much impressed because the little horse very soon gets upon its little legs and has become a complete horse with almost all the abilities that a horse needs. Well, we need at least 10 years for that, and during that period, as the doctor explained to me, we are wired in a way that we can absorb all that information which we need. And that is not always verbal, it is also inverbal, it's emotion, it's movements and everything. It's all the programming we meet. And of course, the programming depends on the environment where we get it. So our parents, but all the other adults around us. And interesting enough, it also includes learning languages accent-free. If you meet someone who speaks your native language, who is not from your native language, but who speaks your native language without an accent, you can be almost sure that she or he spent some time in your country before age 10. And after age 10, of course, we can still learn languages. I mean, most people in this room would probably earn their living because of that. But it is so that you can still, from the way we pronounce a foreign language, we can tell where a person comes from. And our basic values also don't change, not even if we migrate to another country. And one thing you hear when you go to migration countries, that especially in the homes for the aged, the values of these people learned as children become very active again. Okay, this is one of my great philosophers is Calvin and Hobbes. I don't know whether you know this. This is a famous American cartoon, but they sometimes express the truth of life in a very, very simple, clear way. The practices, on the other hand, the outside levels of the onion, symbols, the heroes and the rituals, they can be learned lifelong. Like all of us have learned to work with computers mostly when we were adults. And there's a lot of practices to working with computers. And I must say that I don't think I can continue. I don't possess a smartphone. I must confess that I don't possess a smartphone. I think this is just one step too far from me now. And but okay, I can handle the computer, and that involves a lot of practices, and of course all the communication that goes with it, and the emailing, which dominates for more or less my daily program, and probably yours as well. It also is very fortunate because a lot of work today is done across cultures, and if we needed shared values for that, very little work would get done. But shared practices are sufficient for working together. Okay, now something about history. This is a picture I like. I picked it up in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, and there seem to be a number of copies with it. It's the way the people in the 18th century looked at differences. It's called the Völkertafel, and there must also be other others too. You can't read it from there, but you have on the vertical line, let's see whether I can, yeah, here you have things like Namen, Sitten, Verstand, Wissenschaft, Untugende, was sie lieben, die Krankheiten, Gottesdienst, well, quite a list. And then here are the various nationality, and they are Spanier, Fransoos, Italisch, Deutscher, Engerlander, Schweiz, that's a Swede, Polak, Ungar, Muscovite, that's a Russian, Turk, oder Greek, they are together in one column. Yes, there was obviously the person who planned this was a bit short of planning, and he missed the column. Well, the thing is, and one interesting thing, if you see a table like this, you can always immediately find out the nationality of the person who made it, because there's only one column where all statements are positive. And that's a Deutscher in this case. And so this is what we call today stereotypes, and stereotypes is almost the big taboo of culture studies, because stereotypes just means that, okay, I know Mr. So-and-so, Mr. Mo-and-so from China, so all Chinese are like Mr. So-and-so. Actually, the point about cultures is that the different people within a culture are all different. I compare cultures sometimes to jigsaw puzzles. And the jigsaw puzzle, all the pieces are different, and yet together they make a picture. And this is the way culture works too. So if you try to express the essence of a puzzle, of a jigsaw puzzle, by one single piece, that's what you do when you do stereotyping. Let me see. Yes. Now I want to say something about the dimension approach, which is one of my contributions. And I must confess when I say this that my original training was in mechanical engineering. So I had had a good classical training before, but then I studied engineering. And this thinking in terms of dimensions may have been influenced by the fact that I was also for a time studying machines. Afterwards, I didn't like it very much. I became a psychologist, and but still, the idea of dimensions are that if you have a very complex thing like cultures, then just you can only say very fuzzy things about it, but you can try to see whether there are some fundamental problems which are in there, and you can classify it. And sometimes you get the inspiration behind the desk, but you have to do practical research to show that really, oh yes, this can be found with the data we collect from real people. And then, of course, they're not always useful. They're only useful if we can relate them to tangible facts in the world and also predict behavior. You will, if you have read my work, you will see that I have given different societies, national societies, scores on various dimensional scales, and that the research that other people have done, I myself have done, is to find out to what extent those scores relate to behavior. And this is precisely what I'm going to do in this lecture. Here are the 6 dimensions. Now, some of you may only know the first 4, some of you may know 5, and actually, since our latest book, which appeared in 2010, and owing to my friend Minkov, who is in the room here, we have a 6th dimension as well. And the dimensions are actually based on very fundamental problems which every human society, however simple, however complex, will have to resolve. It is that people are dependent on others, and how much dependence is desirable. The other second is that there is inequality. I can say with a thanks to George Orwell, all societies are unequal, but some are more unequal than others. Then this is the way we are dealing with the unknown. There are a lot of things in society we don't know about, and some societies are more easygoing in that respect than others. Then there is the emotional consequence of having been born as a girl or as a boy. We were never consulted beforehand. We were just there one day, and then we discovered we were girls or we were boys, and that has implications, and the implications, especially emotional, differ from one society to another. And that leads to a lot of differences also in the way those societies interact. Now the next one is time's perspective. Some societies look far ahead, and some look not ahead, look actually to today, or even prefer to look back and walk to the future backwards. And then the last one which is added now is that the extent to which a society deals with natural drives. Is it so we have a lot of things we would like to do naturally. Are we allowed to do them or not? And some societies will say, no, life is no fun, and life is a matter of duty, and work is more important than leisure, and so on. And other societies are just the opposite and say, no, life is the main purpose of life is to have fun, and let's make sure that we have enough fun. And that led to a new dimension, but I will not say too much about that today, but because in the field of communications there is enough to say about others. I also want to say now that there is a difference, obviously, which also is made in the program of this conference, between intracultural and intercultural communication. Most of my lecture will be about difference in communication in styles within national societies. So how is the communication in, say, China different from the communication in, say, Poland? But in the last part, I will also deal with the communication which is very frequent now between different national societies, intercultural. And for the intracultural differences, we really have to look at the values. The values have a very important influence. For the intercultural communications, fortunately, the values don't need to play an important part. It's the practices, but also the personalities, because intercultural communication takes place between persons, and the persons have a very strong personal influence on that. But I will say less about that. Now, from the list of 6 dimensions which I showed you, there are 4 which I want to speak about, especially the first 2, because they are very important for differences in communication styles. And one is about dependence on others, which is individualism versus collectivism. And you can say that individualist societies like direct communication and collectivists like indirect communication. I will come back to that. The second is long versus short term, and that is, on the one hand, whether the communication is dominantly literate or dominantly oral, and also another point which is not so obviously until you discover it, and I owe Dr. Minko very much also the discovery of that side, that it relates to the degree of self-enhancement need, to the need of people to make themselves bigger or smaller. Power distance is the roles and the language depending on the relative position. It is also related to the degree of newspaper reading, which for some of people here may be interesting information. And the last one is uncertainty avoidance, and that is especially evident in the adoption of new media, how fast that goes. I must say that a lot of my knowledge in this field I owe to one of very productive writer. It's a compatriot of mine. It is Dr. Marieke de Mooij. Her work, I will talk about her work more, but a lot of the things I will say are actually her words speaking through me. So just giving her all the honor that she deserves. Well, here is the contrast between the individualist and the collectivist society and the communication style. So this is the individualist side, this is the collectivist side. You have to realize that no country is purely here, no country is purely here. There's always a mixture. You can always place, we are all somewhere in between. We have elements of one, but some are more here, they're strongly here, some are more there. And individualist societies are I societies. Individualist societies, people always talk about I. We just had an American visitor, and I think there was hardly a sentence he said which didn't start with I. Tends to get on the nerves. Collectivist societies are we societies. It is the interdependent self. Individualist societies believe in unique personalities. Collectivist is very important what in-group you are a member of. Individualist societies like direct communication and personal communication, and in collectivist societies indirect, metaphorical. I will give some examples of that. And then there's the distinction between universalist and particularist. Universalist means that basically everybody is the same. And particularist means, no, we have our people and we have them. And it all depends where somebody belongs. Then there is a difference which you also may know. It comes from actually the author Edward Hall, between low context communication and high context communication. In low context communication, it means that everything has to be spelled out. Nothing can be assumed to be known. High context communication means that many things are obviously understood by everybody. And where this is evident, I was told, this is in business contracts in the United States, which are very long, everything has to be written down, and in Japan, which are very short, because many things are known and understood by everybody. And my own personal impression of low context communication, we spent some time, or I spent some time on Hawaii, which is, and it's a piece of America, but of course it's also a piece of the Pacific. And on one of the villages there, in the middle of the market square, there was a coconut tree. And there was a sign underneath, a low contact society, beware of falling coconuts. Then the difference between whether it's good to speak your mind or whether there should be harmony. In individual society, there is more confrontation. Confrontation can be healthy, but here you don't confront. Even if you don't agree, you don't say it in that way. And I remember that in Holland, when we have lived on the countryside, where also there is more collectivism than in the individualist side. And when I was talking with our neighbor, a farmer woman, and she didn't agree with me, then she said, well, you must be right. And that was her way to say, I don't agree. Then in the modern media, the individualist society will actively search for media. The collectivist society, they use a lot of social media, but the social media are focusing upon the in-group. So, and also there's a lot of word of mouth, so the search is more passive. Okay, so far about individualism and collectivism, but here is a ranking of countries. The ranking is more important than the scores, I would say. You can get any scores you want if you know where to put a 0, where to put 100. But, so this is, it goes from the United States and Australia. Here is my own country, Netherlands. In this case, together with Belgium. In Eastern Europe, Hungary is the most individualist we find in our studies, and in Southern Europe is Italy, and we have the Nordic countries, we have the Baltic countries, we have the German-speaking countries, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, we have the central part, including Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, and Spain is a bit on the borderline, and then we get India and Japan, and then we get Russia, Turkey, Greece, Brazil, the Balkan countries also, Romania, Bulgaria, and finally, on the very collectivist, we have the Islamic countries, we have the African countries, and we have the East Asian countries, China and East Asia, and the most collectivist of all, countries like Venezuela, Colombia. Okay, so far about the countries, but this is what Dr. de Moy has inspired to picture the difference between a communication in individualist society and in collectivist societies. So the individualist model of interpersonal communication is there is a sender, there is a message, there is encoding and decoding, and there is a receiver, and there is feedback. In the collectivist model, a lot of is going on, first of all, here. There is a group context and internal evaluation, and in the end, a message goes out. And then the message is read here. It's not necessarily verbal, it can also be symbolic, and it is evaluated again in a group by its own also non-verbal signals, and then there is a mutual reading going on constantly of the non-verbal cues. So this is a very different model of communication than this one. So this is an example. This is an American advertisement, and it is about this is a food supplement, and it's words, and it's direct to you. And this is Spain. It's that Spain is in the middle. Well, this is the way Spain, it's the Dutch company actually in Spain, advertises its beer. Vienna is Friday. So this is the Friday situation, and you put your neckties on the bar and you enjoy the beer. Okay, we go to the next dimension, the dimension of long and short-term communication. And you have the two opposite here, and this is the long-term side, and this is the short-term side. And the long-term side, that you are patient, you don't need to have immediate reactions. On the short term, you want to have immediate reactions, you want to have instant reactions. Another side of it is that long-term oriented, people are trained to be modest. It's called self-effacement, not make yourself bigger than you are. Even make yourself a bit smaller than you are, because nice people do that. And here there is a tendency to make people bigger than they are, to make yourself bigger than you are. Here there is so that traditions are not sacrosanct, traditions can be adapted. And the most striking example of that is that in the 1960s, China introduced the one-child policy. You may have read that they now are going back, it's no longer so necessary. But this, for a country which was very much built on family values, I would say, was an incredible step, but it succeeded more or less. And it certainly is at the root of the Chinese economic miracle. Because if they had not done that, they would have been drowned in population and not been able to feed their entire population. On the other hand, in the short-term oriented, traditions can be sacrosanct, and the most sad tradition is in a very short-term oriented country, the United States of America, where because the Pilgrim Fathers were allowed to carry guns, everybody is supposed to carry guns, and even the worst guns in the world, and nobody can do anything about that. That is it. And then you're still proud of your country. And here, although you still try to learn from other countries. These tend to be literate cultures. They tend to be more oral cultures. Of course, there is reading here too, but the literature, old literature is more important here. Also, these are cultures where people try to be sparing with resources. That is the expression. A good government is being sparing with resources stems from Confucius, the Chinese philosopher 500 BC. He has written, he has said the good government is being sparing with resources. And here, the idea seems to be that good government is spending as much as possible, and if you don't have the money to spend, then you borrow it. We'll all be aware of what's going on in the USA at present. In the new media, you can see that here Facebook is much more popular on this side, and Facebook is also a place where people try to make themselves bigger. They get the biggest face, and here you don't like that. And if you have contacts, you like to have them anonymously, and you have relatively few friends. And here it's nice to have many friends. This is a ranking of the countries for long short term, completely different from the other one. Now you see that at the short term side, you have the East Asian countries on the top. You have Germany and Switzerland. You have also the Baltic countries, and you have Ukraine and Russia. They're also on the long-term side, and the East European countries, including Poland. Fortunately, also not as much as in my own country, the Netherlands and Belgium, France and Italy. The Nordic countries a bit on the borderline, and then the UK, India, and Pakistan more on the short-term side. The countries of southern, the Mediterranean countries, to more on the short-term side, and then Brazil and Spanish America, also short-term, USA and Australia, and the Islamic countries are clearly very short-term, actually more backward-oriented than forward-oriented. This is an example also of the advertising field. This is actually an advertisement for a copying machine. And what would you, this comes from Japan. Why would you want to make a picture to sell your copying machine by showing a very big tree? What kind of thought process is in there? And this is of course for ice cream, and it is not enough that you say it's good ice cream. It also that yes, you have instant pleasure if you eat our ice cream. This is a combination now of for consequences for communication and media of both collectivism, individualism, and short-term, long-term, and I put them next to each other so that you can keep them apart, because otherwise you might think that whether it belongs here or there. This is anyway and with the help of Dr. de Moy, the classification. So intensive interpersonal communication, oral communication. This is more literate communication. This is active information seat. I will not go through all of it. You can read it. And if there are questions about this, we can come back to this later on. But you see, this is very interesting, that in collectivists you have many personal contacts. As a short-term orientation, you have many friends in social media. If you have long-term orientation, you have few friends in social media. and individualist, you have selective friendships. You have the so-called friends on social media, but they're not your real friends. Friends, you have fewer. This is a map. Actually, I got permission from Dr. de Moy to use it, although it is probably... can you still read it in the back there? I wonder whether you can. Oh, you can still. Okay, you've got good eyes then, yeah. It's normally smaller than I would show, but here is Poland anyway. And this is a 2x2 table where the collectivist countries are on this side, individualists here. Short-term are here and long-term are here. And so, for example, long-term collectivist is Korea in the corner. Then individualist and long-term is first in Germany and Belgium. Individualist and short-term is USA and Australia. And the short-term and collectivist is Colombia and Ghana and Panama. So, but anyway, the countries represented here, we have not got too many of them, excuse me for that, but anyway, we've got Poland in there. If you're interested, we have Finland in there. We have Denmark in this corner, Sweden a bit higher up. We can talk about this later if you are interested. I can call it back. Okay, two more dimensions. This one is about power distance. And power distance is actually, well, one way you can say it, whether the society, a good society, everybody has their rightful place. Some people should be up and some people should be down, and that's the way it should be. And the other is, no, there should, society, everybody should be equal. And the ideal society is an equal society. And then you get the ranking of countries here. So the country with the large power distance so far, I think one of the largest is Russia, Serbia also some countries in Latin America, Saudi Arabia, China, India, then it goes slowly down, Bulgaria, Brazil, France. It's quite mixed, you see, from different parts of the world. And then on the small power distance you find Britain, you find Germany, you find USA, Estonia, Finland, Hungary, Japan also not so large power distance. On this side, large power distance, there is respect for authority, also in communication. There is less newspaper reading, more TV watching, and here it's more newspaper reading and less TV watching. Power distance, well, people have more of a need to find out for themselves. Here, when they see somebody on TV who tells them how it is, then they think this is how it is. Here are anti-authority arguments, opinions of critical minds, and also here is more respect for older people, and here is more respect for younger people. I must say that I have my own experiences that I came from a country which is more on this side. And when I got older, after my retirement in Holland, I started teaching in Hong Kong. And this was a very pleasant move, because there I suddenly discovered that people had much more respect for me there than they had in Holland. In Holland they said, well, this fellow is so old, what can he still tell us? And in Hong Kong they say, well, he is a professor, he's already so old, and yes, and he knows a lot. Uncertainty avoidance is the way you cope with ambiguity, it's not whether you want to make everything certain, but whether you tolerate the fact that there are things you don't know, you cannot predict. And then the countries where they don't like this, like Greece and Russia. Poland also not so for. But there's a difference here between Japan and China. China is much more an uncertainty avoiding country. Sweden is an uncertainty tolerant country. Sweden is uncertainty tolerant. Britain is. Germany is much less so. And so what you find in the strong uncertainty avoidance countries is that they are good at being precise. They're good at having structure. They're good at making, let's say, precision products. You would not want to buy a watch from a country on this side. You'll buy a watch from a country on this side. But it's often the inventions are made here and applied here. So there is, talking about humor, now I don't know whether it's everywhere the case, but there would be more humor in advertising in the weak uncertainty avoidance side here than here. For example, in Germany, which is not even so much higher up, but I remember that a lot of advertising is done with a gentleman in a white coat, and who is probably a hair doctor, and he will tell you what is good for you. That is obviously seems to work in selling things to Germans. This is an example of uncertainty avoidance. Uncertainty avoidance is known to predict how fast a new invention will be introduced. It doesn't mean that it is not introduced everywhere, but it takes more time. And this is interesting. This is a diagram I own also to Dr. de Moy. And she has two. She has this is the uncertainty avoidance scores of these countries for which there were data. And this 2002, this is the percentage of population that at that time, 2002, had no access to internet, either at home or in work. And this is 2007, and now there is a graph of the percentage population who use the internet, but only at work, never at home. And you see it's again the same thing. It is using internet at home, then you have to be rather uncertainty accepting. And if you are uncertainty avoiding, you will be careful. First of all, you didn't have internet at all, and now that you have, you use it specifically for work. Now, the last part is about intercultural. This was about, so far, about intracultural communication. This is about intercultural communication. Intercultural communication has always been there. All kinds of antiquities show that there has been fighting going on between different cultures. So a lot of intercultural contacts, unfortunately, in history, were violent and as old as mankind. Nowadays, of course, we are interested especially in how do we have non-violent intercultural communication. And this is absolutely no doubt, this can be learned. Of course, in order to learn it, you must want to learn it, because it can be painful to learn it. It is not, and not everybody is equally motivated to try to learn it. But first of all, you must be aware. And that is not obvious always. It helps if you move to other countries or you travel in other countries that you discover that things are done there differently. Secondly, you must know something about it, and there is a lot of information now available, books, and even there's information on the web. But sometimes people tell me, yes, but the most difficult was actually knowing my own culture. Actually, because I know about these other cultures, but yeah, I don't know whether, if you have read my book, you will have seen that I have an old English nursery rhyme from probably about 100 years ago. It goes as follows. The Germans live in Germany, the Romans live in Rome, the Turkish live in Turkey, this is of course a joke, a double joke, but the English live at home. And discovering that at home you also have a culture, that's the most difficult thing. And then the third thing is skilled, so that if, okay, now you are going to deal with people from different culture, you're going to negotiate your next contract with people from China. Now, how do I do that? And that is the kind of intercultural skills you need. And actually, I say intercultural communication uses practices, and I've been thinking of what practices are there. Well, what are practices, for example, in symbols? Well, there are trade languages, and we know that in the world lots of trade languages, and we also call them sometimes pidgin languages. And one example, just a few years ago, we were on a trip, and we were on the Norwegian-Russian border. And there was a museum about the North Norwegian-Russian trade. And what we discovered is that they had developed a language of their own, which was called Moja Pocoja, which is that, well, they mixed, of course that's Russian, but they mixed words from one language to another language, and that together should be enough that they could do the business they had to do. And it seems to be that actually the business was quite profitable. Trade languages. Actually, a lot of the English people think they speak is no more than a pidgin for many people in the world. Then heroes, the particular hero I think in intercultural affairs is the intermediary. Intermediate is very important, especially if one of the cultures is collectivist, because it means that there must be somebody who can be accepted as one of us, and at the same time is acceptable to the other. So it's a very particular skill, and I would call these people the heroes of intercultural communication. And then rituals, well, don't laugh, but I think that it's very important that you know the skills of eating and drinking together, and when you drink, and what you drink, and where you drink. So a lot of the business in the world is done around the lunch or dinner table, and a strong stomach, I think, is an asset in intercultural negotiation. Then it also depends on the personality. I already said that it depends on the personalities involved, and now, even diving into personality psychology, there are two personality characteristics which I think are very important. One is stability. It's the opposite of the personality characteristic neuroticism, so it is low neuroticism, stability, which means that as a person you are able to not to be easily surprised. That if you are in an unexpected situation, you do not get nervous, you know how to cope with it. And the second one is openness to experience, which some people say is also another word for simply IQ, intelligence level. That, but it means that you must have a curiosity for what is new, a curiosity for the things you don't know. You must see, hey, this is different, and you must be able also to, you know, the word maybe serendipity. Serendipity is the art of discovering the things you had not expected, and that is also part of it. Of course, language skills, and fortunately we have all kind of people who teach all kinds of languages, very important role in the world. And I would say exposure to other cultures in childhood and adolescence. I'm personally a fan of these programs that exchange secondary school children. There is one organization which is called, I have been lecturing for, it's called AFS, Intercultural Programs. Has anybody here ever been a student in one of these programs? Have been a student. It is originally, it was an American program that brought foreigners to America, but afterwards it has been changed. They have to change themselves into a multicultural, all multi-directional program. So I know about a Dutch girl that has gone to Argentina, and I know about a German girl that has gone to Tanzania, and so there are all kinds of possibilities. So if children, usually last year of secondary school, if they really want to have this experience and their parents want to support it, then they can do this. Often it's also exchanging, so there's also a child from the other school, well, other country coming to them and going to school there. Okay, something about books. This is the book which, could you give me the Polish edition? This is our latest book, and this is the Polish version of it. It's here. This is, actually, you see the authors are now 3. I got 2 co-authors. One happens to be our eldest son, who actually is a biologist and an information technologist, but because I'm an engineer and a psychologist, I mean, we are not afraid of mixing disciplines. And my friend Minkov is a linguist and a psychologist, so that's probably precisely what makes us interested in this work. And it's available in various languages so far, and some more are coming. And the previous editions, which were 2005 or 1991, have also appeared in these languages so far. Originally, there was an academic book. I started off with the book not knowing at all that it would ever become popular. And the first edition was 1980, but in 2001, I rewrote it completely because in the meantime, so much literature had been written about it that it became a kind of almost encyclopedia, 600 pages, 2 columns. I would say, this is a book for people who want to do a PhD, and this is for people who want to just have a pleasant evening reading about culture. Now, also to honor my friend and is Dr. Marieke de Mooy. She has just issued, this is a matter of actually, well, I think end of September, a matter of weeks, this book, which is, she's now, I think she's about 70 now, and she has reflected and said, well, the main problem I saw is that people have, who teach communication always have the American model of communication in their mind. And in fact, in the world, there are many ways of communication. And then she has devoted her time in finding, because she has a very international career. She has been at an international job herself. And she has dived into African communication and Asian communication. And this is the result. And it is published by Springer, which is a German international company. I think it's a fairly expensive book, but it's also available as an e-book, and that's less expensive. And if you want to, are you specifically into marketing, this is her rather famous book about marketing, which in the meantime, in less than 20 years, has already got its first edition. Okay, so far this was what I wanted to say. About the time, I'm not responsible. Is there time for questions?
Yes, there's plenty of time. We have at least 10 minutes for questions.
Okay.
So you can run around with the microphone.
Yes, thank you.
If there are any questions, feel free. We've got 10 minutes. We can ask Professor Hofstede any question you would like to ask. Yes, please.
Yes.
Well, I just want to say thank you very much for the lecture, it's very interesting. But I have a question about the differences between young people communicating and elderly people. You mentioned a lot about Facebook, about the development of social media. From young people's perspective, social media is extremely popular and it's becoming a very normal form of communication in the modern world. Would you say that that is making people more collective than individual, especially in the Americans and in the UK, where social media now is almost a daily form of communication? Can you make some sort of comment upon that, please?
Yes, I tried to show that the use of social media is still culturally modified. It is not the same in all culture. It is very much reflecting these dimensions of individualism, collectivism, and long-term, short-term. So social media, but let me try to get back here. Yeah, for example, this is social media. So you were talking about Britain and America. Okay, then you are in the short-term and individualist side. There is more self-enhancement need, for example. People try themselves. Yeah. There is a lot of preference for Facebook and many friends. But also there is active information search, and actually the real friendships are selective. And then in the opposite, well, let me go to the next one, to this map. Where this is the USA and this is the UK. It's this corner. Self-enhancement, self-disclosure, many friends, Facebook popular, and a resource for information. But if you go to East Asia, then there is well, it's funny that it's called Facebook, because face has got a completely different flavor in Asia. There's a preference for anonymity, a preference for few friends, and the social media are used, but they're used inside. They're used inside the insiders group. Here, the social media in the collectivist short term are a virtual family actually, and there's still self-enhancement. But this idea of the virtual family is not at all here. And here you have the, when you have the long-term and individualism, you have more privacy need, you have more selective friendships in social media, and you have still the active search. So there is a difference. So it doesn't mean that this hardware affects the software. Of course, we need more software, but still, people apply the hardware in a way which is consistent with their culture. And the information about this is not always so easy to get. And especially journalists, they jump to the conclusion, oh yes, but now the whole world, we have a global village, and so well, the global village, unfortunately, doesn't exist at all.
Yes, in your analysis between short and long-term orientation and collectivism and individualism, cultures seem to remain quite stable. The question is, do cultures change?
Yes, thanks for the question. That's a question, yeah, an accurate aspect. Actually, we have now a very good study about this, because thanks to the world value survey. Actually, my studies started in 1980 from one database, the database I had got from the IBM Corporation after I had left IBM. I had left IBM because I wanted to study this material. I could get their permission to use it, but there was no other material available. And this was in the 1970s. In the 1980s and especially the 1990s, a lot more material is available. And now we have the World Value Survey and a few others also, which are repetitive. Actually, the World Value Survey started as the European Value Survey, but it is in its 5th cycle. So you can see over time whether the culture changed. Now, the basic conclusion is, yes, they change, but their order remains the same. They tend to shift together. And a Dutch professor, Beugelsdijk, recently has given a paper at a recent conference where he showed that when he had selected 2 cohorts, people 30 years older than the old people and young people, so say people around in their 20s and 30s or in the 50s and 60s, and the oldest cohort was about the time that the data from my studies were collected. But they were based on the World Value Survey. And then to the extent that you could reconstruct from their questions the same dimensions, which is not always perfectly possible, but what you could see is that, yes, the order of countries changes very little. However, there is a worldwide shift, and the worldwide shift has been, over these 30 years, from older to younger people, that there is less collectivism and more individualism. So the collectivists have become less collectivist. And also in this last dimension, from indulgence to restraint, which I haven't talked very much about, they have become more indulgent and less restrained. And finally, there has been a shift on the dimension of power distance, that the larger power distance have become smaller. I think we can notice this almost everywhere. If you look at what happens in the Middle East at present, it's clearly so that younger generations don't accept the amount of inequality their parents have. And probably also the modern media play an important role there, because you get information from elsewhere. So, so the differences don't disappear, but if we shift, we tend to shift together. For the other dimensions, there was no evidence of a systematic change. They would just remain as they were.
If there is no one else, okay. There is.
She has an internal mic.
Thank you for this talk. Now, do I get it right that you define the role of globalization? Because maybe I get it wrong, but you said that even though people live side by side and they form different forms of hybrids, cultural and social hybrids, they stay unchanged? Is it what you wanted to say?
Okay, if I understand you particularly think of people who are living on the edge of more than one culture.
Yes.
Yes? Yeah, and that is, of course, yeah. First of all, I'm not sure there are more people now than before. It is possible, but of course the hybrids have always existed. There have been migrations from one place to another, and people adopted other. But yes, so I think that these hybrids also they appear in different forms. You have also migrants who encapsulate. I think that, for example, the Sinti and Roma tend to be an example of a group that tends to keeps itself to itself, and others become very successful in another culture. You also have the impression that in some countries the migration of Islamic people tends to lead to encapsulation, and whether that is how that works, I don't know. Whether that's a minority problem or whether it's a majority problem, that is, I think, a question for discussion.
So we'll get to ask you a question at the end.
That's a very simple question. I'm not sure about the answer. Is there one culture in every country? And I'm not talking about countries like the United States, where there could be multiple cultures depending on the origin of the sort of the Americans.
Well, the big expert is sitting almost next to you there, because we have just published an article about regional cultures within countries, and especially within large countries. And the idea is, of course, that if you zoom in on a country, you will find regional differences, obviously. But when you try to sort those regions out and you use some kind of statistical means to get the similars together, they still tend to group according to country. So yes, the regions are different, but they are still more equal to each other within one country than they are equal to regions in other countries. So they are both similar and different.
Thank you.
Do you agree, Michel?
This is what Professor Hofstede is right, of course. We published a paper. Actually, we're going to publish another one now on European regions, and they also cluster along national lines. For example, Norwegian regions cluster, they form a Norwegian cluster. Belgian is an interesting exception. They seem to have a Flemish culture that is different from the French-speaking culture. That's an exception. But we're also going to publish a paper in which we show that religious groups within a country are also much more similar to each other than to religious groups in another country. An example, Egyptian Muslims are much more similar culturally to Egyptian Christians than to any other Muslims. Even Jordanian Muslims are more different than Egyptian Muslims and Egyptian Christians. Bulgarian Muslims who are Turks, so we have two differences, different religion and different ethnicity. Still, Bulgarian Turks and Bulgarian Orthodox Slavs cluster together separately from Turkish Muslims and from Russian Muslims and so on. So nations have an extremely powerful capacity to create national culture, and we found that this applies even to African nations. Even though they have existed for only about 50, 60 years, still you observe the same thing. The regions and different religions of African nations cluster by nation.
So,
thank you very much. Could I just ask a simple question about the methodology of collecting your data? Was it done by means of questionnaires? How you selected your respondents? I'm particularly interested in the social media data, if this is not a secret to share.
Are you specifically thinking about the social media now?
I'm thinking about the social media, yes,
yes.
but I'm also looking at this diagram behind you, and obviously the combination of different aspects.
To the extent that we use things like the World Value Survey, the European Social Survey, there are institutionalized ways of collecting by questionnaire. About the social media, I've already confessed in the beginning that I got my wisdom from Dr. de Moy. I went to her, I have seen her, said I have to give this talk about intercultural communication, can you help me? And so she got me the data, and she has information about it's in that type of survey and that type of survey, but I could not give the answer. I would have to check back with her.
Thank you very much.
I think we must regrettably close now. Thank you very much for all the questions. Thank you very much for this wonderful overview. The lecture has been very dense. I'm sure we want to go over it and listen to it again, and this will be possible. We are recording this for that purpose, and the recording will be made available with permission of Professor Hofstede, so that you can all watch it and listen to it again. If you have any personal questions or personal comments, something to discuss with Professor Hofstede, again, this is possible. This morning, well apart from the morning, also during the lunch hour, maybe in the afternoon too. Professor Hofstede is leaving tomorrow, so please use that chance. Thank you very much.